The Indo-Pacific is no longer a quiet expanse of blue on the map. It is the center stage of a great global drama, the theater where the contest for power in the 21st century will be decided. The waters that stretch from the eastern shores of Africa to the far Pacific carry more than ships. They carry the lifelines of economies, the ambitions of nations, and the weight of history itself. For centuries, these seas were trade routes, connecting civilizations through commerce and culture. Today, they are arteries of strategic competition, pulsing with the tension of rival powers. Nearly two-thirds of the world's oil, one-third of its bulk cargo, and a staggering portion of its data flows through this maritime space. Whoever shapes its rules will shape the future. It is here in this vast and contested region that a quiet coalition has emerged, one that could determine whether this future belongs to a single hegemon or to a community of nations. They call it the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, an alignment of four democracies: India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. On paper, it is just a consultation forum, a mechanism for dialogue. In reality, it is something far more profound, the embryonic structure of a security and economic architecture designed to prevent domination, to preserve freedom of navigation, to keep the Indo-Pacific open. But if the Quad is the scaffold on which this architecture rests, one nation is the keystone: India. Why India? Why not the United States with its aircraft carriers and global reach? Why not Japan with its technological might, or Australia with its unwavering alignment to the West? The answer lies in a convergence of geography, demography, and destiny. India is not just another member of the Quad, it is the hinge on which the entire Indo-Pacific strategy swings. Without India, the Quad is a triangle, and a weak one at that. With India, it becomes a balancing force capable of shaping the region's future. But to understand why, we must travel back to the origins of this grouping, to the shifting tides of history that brought these nations together. The story begins in tragedy. December 2004, a massive earthquake off the coast of Sumatra triggers a tsunami that devastates shores across Asia, killing more than 200,000 people. Amid the chaos, four nations spring into action: India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. They coordinate relief efforts, sharing information, resources, and logistics. It is an extraordinary demonstration of rapid cooperation, improvised in the heat of disaster. For those watching closely, it sparks a thought: if these countries can work together in crisis, why not in strategy? Why not in shaping the security of the region they all depend on? And thus a seed is planted. In 2007, that seed sprouts. The four nations convene in Manila for the first Quad dialogue, buoyed by talk of a concert of democracies. Naval exercises follow, and for a brief moment, it seems Asia has found its counterweight to a rising China, but the moment fades. Beijing protests furiously, warning of containment. Domestic politics in Australia shifts. Japan changes leadership, and India, wary of antagonizing China, steps back. The Quad goes into hibernation, a footnote in the annals of diplomacy. The idea is ahead of its time, but time, as it turns out, has a way of catching up. Fast forward a decade, the global landscape has changed beyond recognition. China is no longer just the world's factory, it is the world's second largest economy, a technological power, and a military giant. Its navy, once coastal, now roams the deep seas. It builds artificial islands in the South China Sea, fortifying them with runways and missile batteries, thumbing its nose at international law. It launches the Belt and Road Initiative, pouring billions into infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Ports, pipelines, highways. What looks like development begins to resemble encirclement, a string of pearls stretching across the Indian Ocean, tightening around India's maritime lifelines. In 2017, the standoff at Doklam brings India and China to the brink on a remote Himalayan plateau. 3 years later in Galwan, Indian soldiers die in a brutal clash in the icy heights of Ladakh, the first deadly encounter between the two armies in 45 years. For New Delhi, the illusion of stable ties with Beijing shatters. For Washington, the dream of a responsible stakeholder in China evaporates. The era of strategic hedging is over. The era of great power rivalry has begun, and so the Quad returns, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. Officials meet on the sidelines of ASEAN in 2017. A year later, foreign ministers gather. By 2021, the leaders themselves sit down for a virtual summit, pledging cooperation on vaccines, technology, and infrastructure. The rhetoric is cautious, a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, but the subtext is clear, balancing China without provoking war. Skeptics call it a talk shop. Optimists see the embryo of an Asian NATO. The truth lies somewhere in between, a flexible coalition, unbound by treaty, yet united by converging interests. And at the heart of this coalition is India, the only member that shares a land border with China, the only one that is not a formal U.S. ally, the only one that straddles the Indian Ocean like a colossus. India's importance is not a matter of flattery. It is a matter of geography. Look at the map. The Indian Ocean is misnamed. It is not India's to own, but it is India's to influence. From the choke point of Hormuz in the west to the Malacca Strait in the east, the sea lanes that fuel Asia's economies run through waters India can dominate. 80% of China's oil imports pass through these routes. Every container ship carrying goods to and from East Asia relies on them. In peacetime, this is a vulnerability. In crisis, it is a weapon. For all its naval ambitions, China remains tethered to the Malacca Strait, a narrow funnel easily monitored from India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This Malacca dilemma haunts Chinese strategists, and they know why, because India is the one power that can turn it into a chokehold if pushed to the wall. But geography is only the first layer. The second is capability, and here too the picture is changing. For decades, India's navy was the poor cousin of its army, tasked with defending coasts rather than projecting power. No longer. Today, India operates 2 aircraft carriers, with a third on the way. It is building nuclear-powered submarines that can lurk unseen for months, adding stealth destroyers and long-range maritime patrol aircraft to its arsenal. It is investing in anti-submarine warfare, in space-based surveillance, in network battle systems that can plug into allied forces when needed. These are not vanity projects, they are instruments of deterrence, designed to ensure that no adversary can dominate India's backyard without paying a price. And through the Malabar exercises, India is honing interoperability with the US, Japanese, and Australian navies, practicing maneuvers that range from carrier strike operations to undersea warfare. These drills are more than theater, they are signals to friends and rivals alike that the Quad can, if necessary, move from words to deeds. But hard power alone does not define the Indo-Pacific contest. The struggle is not just on the waves, it is in the veins of global commerce, in the invisible threads of technology and finance that bind nations together. Power in this century will flow not only from aircraft carriers, but from algorithms, not only from missile ranges, but from microchips. And here the Quad has begun to shape an agenda as consequential as its naval drills, the quest for economic resilience and technological sovereignty. The pandemic was a wake-up call, a brutal reminder of the fragility of global supply chains. A microscopic virus brought the world's factories to a halt, choked trade, and exposed a dangerous truth. that the arteries of globalization run disproportionately through one country, China. From semiconductors to rare earth minerals, from pharmaceuticals to 5G networks, Beijing's grip on critical sectors is not just an economic advantage, it is a strategic lever. For the democracies of the Indo-Pacific, this is a vulnerability that borders on existential. If the flow of chips stops, so does everything: planes, phones, power grids, even missiles. If digital networks are controlled, so is the data that drives modern life. Dependence becomes deterrence, interdependence becomes intimidation. The Quad's response is not mere rhetoric. In March 2021, its leaders unveiled an ambitious plan to secure supply chains for semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and critical minerals. They pledged to collaborate on emerging technologies, 5G alternatives, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, fields that will decide who writes the operating system of the future. India is central to this vision. It is not just a market of 1.4 billion consumers. It is an economy with the potential to become both a manufacturing hub and an innovation powerhouse. Its pharmaceutical industry is already a global leader, producing much of the world's generic medicines. Its digital economy is surging, with more than 500 million internet users and a booming startup ecosystem. With the right investments, India could become a linchpin in semiconductor fabrication, a trusted node in global technology networks, and a bulwark against authoritarian control of digital infrastructure. But this requires more than ambition. It requires alignment of standards, of regulations, of strategy. That is why Quad discussions increasingly sound less like naval communiques and more like tech conferences. They talk of secure 5G supply chains, of submarine cables that carry 95% of the world's data, of cybersecurity norms and resilient infrastructure. This is the new front line, a domain where code is as potent as cannon, where influence flows through fiber optics rather than shipping lanes. And in this domain too, India matters not as a passive participant, but as an active shaper of rules. Whether it is rejecting untrusted 5G vendors, championing open source platforms, or leading the International Solar Alliance, India is signaling that its strategic autonomy is compatible with strategic convergence when the stakes are high enough. Yet for all this promise, the Quad faces questions it cannot ignore. The first is coherence. Unlike NATO, it has no treaty, no collective defense clause, no permanent secretariat. Its members differ in threat perception, in geography, in economic exposure. For Washington, the Indo-Pacific is one theater among many, a priority, yes, but one that competes with Europe and the Middle East. For Tokyo and Canberra, China is an immediate existential challenge. For New Delhi, it is a neighbor, a rival, a threat, but also a trading partner, a reality it cannot wish away. This asymmetry is both a strength and a weakness. It gives the Quad flexibility, but it also fuels doubts when crisis comes over Taiwan, over the South China Sea. Will the Quad act in unison, or will it fracture under the weight of ambiguity? The second question is sustainability. Can the Quad maintain momentum without provoking the very escalation it seeks to deter? China sees the grouping as a containment ring, an Asian NATO in disguise. Its propaganda machine denounces it as a clique, a Cold War relic. In response, Beijing has doubled down, expanding naval patrols, courting smaller states with infrastructure deals, and weaving its own networks through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS. For countries in Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, this creates a dilemma: align too closely with the Quad and risk Chinese wrath, stay aloof, and risk strategic irrelevance. The Quad must navigate this landscape with finesse, offering public goods, vaccines, infrastructure, technology that make alignment a choice of benefit, not burden. And then there is the third question, the most delicate of all: India's calculus. For all its partnerships, New Delhi, remains fiercely protective of its strategic autonomy. It will not sign alliances. It will not cede decision-making sovereignty. Its defense ties with Russia remain deep, even as Moscow drifts toward Beijing. Its trade with China, paradoxically, has surged even amid border tensions. This balancing act is not confusion, it is strategy. India seeks to avoid entrapment in great power rivalry, even as it hedges against Chinese aggression. For the Quad, this means calibrating expectations, not demanding what India cannot give, but enabling what it can. Logistics agreements, intelligence sharing, joint exercises, technology cooperation, these are steps India has embraced. A mutual defense pact, that remains a bridge too far. And yet history has a way of forcing choices. If China crosses certain red lines, on the Himalayan frontier, in the Indian Ocean, in Taiwan, the space for ambiguity will shrink. In such a scenario, the Quad could harden into something resembling an alliance, with India as its eastern anchor. But even short of war, the trajectory is clear. The Indo-Pacific is becoming the center of gravity for global politics, and India is becoming the pivot. Its decisions will ripple far beyond its shores, shaping not only regional stability, but the very architecture of international order. Imagine the map in 2040. The Indo-Pacific is not a region, it is the world's economic core, generating 2/3 of global GDP. Its digital highways carry oceans of data. Its sea lanes bear the lifeblood of commerce. Great power rivalry defines its politics, but so does interdependence. In this world, two scenarios loom. In the first, China dominates, a hierarchy enforced by debt, by bases, by digital control. Freedom of navigation is a memory, sovereignty is negotiable, the rules are written in Beijing. In the second scenario, the Indo-Pacific remains open, messy, multipolar, competitive, yes, but governed by norms that prevent coercion, by coalitions that deter aggression. The difference between these futures may come down to one factor: whether India steps up, not as a balancer on the margins, but as a co-architect of order. The opportunity is unprecedented, but so is the challenge. India must think beyond its continental reflexes, beyond the logic of mere defense. It must embrace the ocean as its strategic frontier, invest in the sinews of maritime power, in the infrastructure of influence, ports, cables, energy corridors. It must build economic depth, technological edge, and diplomatic agility. And it must do so while managing contradictions, engaging the West without alienating the global South, deterring China without triggering war, modernizing without compromising sovereignty. This is a tightrope, yes, but it is also a gateway to leadership, to security, to shaping history. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. The Quad is not a silver bullet. It will not solve every problem, deter every threat, or guarantee every outcome, but it is a beginning, a scaffold on which a new order can rise. Without India, that scaffold collapses. With India, it stands a chance, not of dominating, but of balancing, not of containing, but of preserving space for choice. In the end, this is what is at stake: the freedom of nations to chart their own course, the openness of seas that connect rather than divide, the resilience of a system that resists the gravity of hegemony. The tides of history are moving swiftly. In the decades ahead, storms will come: economic shocks, technological disruptions, political crises, perhaps even war. But in the long arc of that future, one truth will endure: the Indo-Pacific will decide the fate of the 21st century, and India will decide the fate of the Indo-Pacific. That is the Quad factor. That is the hinge on which the door of history now swings. The question is simple, yet profound: will India push it open, or let it close?